The attack on Doha by Israel represents one of the most provocative and destabilizing actions in recent Middle Eastern history, and its consequences ripple far beyond Qatar itself. To understand how this strike affects the United States and the Gulf states, it is necessary to break down both the immediate and long-term implications. Looking at the strategic, political, and economic angles, the Gulf has always been a region where alliances and rivalries are carefully balanced, and this move threatens to upset that balance in ways that could have global impact. First, let's establish the context. Doha, the capital of Qatar, has for years positioned itself as a mediator in regional conflicts. Whether it is hosting Hamas officials, facilitating indirect talks between Iran and Western powers, or serving as the headquarters for Al Jazeera, Qatar has cultivated an image of being a small but influential diplomatic broker. Israel's attack on Doha, therefore, is not just a strike on Qatari soil. It is a strike on the symbolic hub of negotiations and soft power in the Arab world. For the United States, which relies on Qatar for critical military presence through Al Udeid Air Base, this is a deeply complicating factor. Washington now finds itself caught between its support for Israel as a close ally and its need to preserve strategic ties with Qatar as a security and energy partner. In performance terms, Israel's move can be seen as high risk, high reward. On one hand, it signals that Israel is willing to target any state that provides safe haven to its enemies, even if that state is closely aligned with the U.S. From a deterrence perspective, this could strengthen Israel's position, making other Gulf states think twice before engaging with groups hostile to Israel. On the other hand, this performance comes at a cost. By undermining a U.S. partner, Israel may strain its relationship with Washington and alienate key Gulf powers, who already feel caught in a difficult balancing act between Israel, Iran, and their own domestic constituencies. Looking at design elements, one could argue that the attack was carefully calculated to send multiple messages. To Hamas and other militant groups, the message is clear: no sanctuary is safe. Not even in a wealthy, well-protected capital like Doha. To Iran, it suggests that Israel is extending its reach deeper into the Gulf, prepared to challenge Iranian allies or facilitators wherever they may be. To the Gulf monarchies, particularly Saudi Arabia and the UAE, it is a reminder that normalization with Israel does not shield them from being pulled into the crossfire of Israeli security interests. The design of the attack is less about the physical destruction it caused and more about the psychological and geopolitical shockwaves it generated. For the Gulf states, this strike forces a difficult recalibration. Qatar will almost certainly rally regional support, portraying itself as a victim of aggression that threatens Gulf sovereignty. Saudi Arabia, which has been cautiously moving toward normalization with Israel, now faces domestic and regional pressure to reconsider those steps. The UAE, already one of the most forward-leaning Gulf states in its relations with Israel, risks being seen as complicit if it remains silent, while Oman and Kuwait, traditionally more cautious, may take a harder stance against Israeli moves in the region. Collectively, the Gulf Cooperation Council faces a test of unity. Some members prioritize closer ties with the U.S. and Israel for security and technological cooperation, while others place a stronger emphasis on solidarity with the Palestinian cause and opposition to Israeli interventionism. From the perspective of the United States, the attack represents a design flaw in its Middle East strategy. Washington has sought to maintain a dual track of unwavering support for Israel, while simultaneously building deeper military and energy partnerships with Gulf states like Qatar. Israel striking Doha complicates that balancing act, as it forces the U.S. to either side more overtly with Israel and risk alienating Gulf allies, or defend Qatari sovereignty and risk straining relations with Israel. Neither path is ideal, and both could weaken American credibility in the region. This comes at a time when Washington is already trying to pivot attention to Asia and avoid deeper entanglement in the Middle East. Yet actions like this drag it back into regional rivalries. One of the unique selling points of this event is how it exposes the fragility of the so-called Abraham Accords and other normalization efforts. Proponents of these agreements argued that closer ties between Israel and Gulf states would foster stability, economic cooperation, and a united front against Iran. Yet, Israel striking one of the Gulf capitals shows how quickly these arrangements can be undermined by unilateral military action. For Gulf leaders, the appeal of normalization is based on pragmatic benefits such as technology transfer, intelligence sharing, and trade. But those benefits are harder to sell domestically if their publics view Israel as an aggressor threatening Arab sovereignty. The optics of Israel bombing Doha could undo years of quiet diplomatic groundwork, forcing Gulf monarchs to slow or even reverse the normalization track to preserve legitimacy at home. Another unique aspect is the energy dimension. Qatar is one of the world's largest exporters of liquefied natural gas, and global energy markets are sensitive to any instability in the Gulf. Even if the attack did not directly target energy infrastructure, the perception of vulnerability could drive up prices, unsettle markets, and push Europe and Asia into renewed anxieties about supply security. The U.S., already heavily invested in promoting Qatari gas as an alternative to Russian energy, now faces a situation where Israel's military decisions undermine its own economic and strategic goals. This creates a paradox. Washington depends on both Israel and Qatar for different aspects of its global strategy. But an attack like this forces those two pillars into conflict. Domestically within the U.S., the attack will fuel debates in Congress and among policymakers. Supporters of Israel will frame the action as a necessary strike against terrorism facilitators, while critics will highlight the danger of letting Israel's military strategy dictate American diplomatic headaches. With a presidential election looming, candidates will have to take positions, and those positions could influence both foreign policy commitments and relations with Arab American and Muslim American communities. For Gulf states, this presents an opportunity to leverage their ties with Washington more forcefully, pressing for reassurances, security guarantees, or arms deals in exchange for continued cooperation. Another layer to consider is how Iran positions itself in the aftermath. Iran has long cultivated ties with Qatar, especially during the years when Saudi Arabia and the UAE imposed a blockade on Doha. Israel's strike could push Qatar closer to Tehran, at least temporarily, as both countries frame themselves as resisting Israeli aggression. This would be an unintended consequence for both Israel and the U.S., since their broader regional strategy is built around containing Iran's influence. If Qatar deepens coordination with Iran in response to this attack, the balance of power in the Gulf could tilt in a direction that neither Washington nor Tel Aviv desires. The Gulf states are not monolithic in their responses, which adds to the complexity. Saudi Arabia might see this as an opportunity to position itself as the defender of Arab sovereignty and the Palestinian cause, especially as it seeks to reassert leadership in the Arab world. The UAE, invested in its ties with Israel, may try to downplay the incident and urge restraint, but risks being perceived as overly aligned with Israel at the expense of regional solidarity. Bahrain, with its close ties to both the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, will likely echo Riyadh's stance, while Oman and Kuwait, historically more cautious and sympathetic to the Palestinian issue, may take stronger rhetorical positions against Israel. This divergence in responses further weakens the Gulf Cooperation Council's ability to act as a united bloc. What makes this event stand out in performance terms is the way it forces every player into a reactive mode. Israel's action dictates the agenda, while the U.S., Gulf states, and even Iran are forced to respond rather than set the terms themselves. This is a demonstration of Israel's ability to shape the regional narrative. But whether that performance translates into long-term strategic gain is doubtful. The backlash may outweigh the short-term psychological and military impact, particularly if the Gulf states rally around Qatar and use this moment to question the reliability of U.S. guarantees. The diplomatic design of the Gulf states has always been to balance relations with major powers hosting American bases, trading with Europe and Asia, keeping a working relationship with Iran, and cautiously engaging Israel. Israel's attack disrupts this design by creating a situation where balance becomes much harder to maintain. It forces Gulf states to choose sides more explicitly, something they have long tried to avoid. For Washington, that makes the Gulf a more volatile and less predictable environment, precisely at a time when global energy security and great power competition require stability. In summary, the attack on Doha is not just another episode in Israel's ongoing conflict with its adversaries. It is a strike that reverberates across the architecture of U.S. Gulf relations, energy markets, regional diplomacy, and domestic politics in multiple countries. It demonstrates Israel's willingness to extend its military reach, but at the cost of undermining the fragile web of normalization and strategic alignment that the U.S. has been cultivating. For Gulf states, it is both a challenge to sovereignty and a test of unity, forcing leaders to rethink how they balance relations with Israel, the U.S., and Iran. For Washington, it is a reminder that in the Middle East, no alliance is insulated from the consequences of conflict. And no strategy remains intact when military actions override diplomatic designs.